He went to another room of the house at the same time. He went to the bed where her son, her 15-year-old son, Derek Joseph Orman, lay on a couch that had been folded out into a bed. And he shot that boy to death as that boy lay in bed. At the time he murdered Jamie Lynn Orman, she was 30 years old and she was 7 months pregnant. He knew she was pregnant. He knew she was 7 months pregnant. You will hear testimony from the medical examiner that at the time she died, she had a baby inside her that was 34 weeks old in gestation, and that it was old enough to live outside the womb, and that whoever killed Jamie Lynn Orman also killed that unborn baby. You're going to hear that these murders were done for greed. This defendant's greed. Greed for money. Greed because he thought he would end up sharing the insurance money that he expected would end up going to his girlfriend, Michelle Lawrence. To understand this tragedy of greed and murder, you need to start with a marriage gone bad. The marriage of John Lawrence and Michelle Lawrence. At this time, in October of 2009, John Lawrence and Michelle Lawrence had been married for several years, but they were in the process of going through a divorce. They were separated, and each one of them had found somebody else. Each one of them was, in fact, living with somebody else, but they weren't yet divorced. Michelle Lawrence was living with this defendant, Ryan Patterson. Ryan Patterson was her new boyfriend, even though she was still married to John Lawrence. John Lawrence was living in the home that he and Michelle Lawrence had shared as man and wife, a house at 1224 North Missouri Street in Cape Girardeau, which is in the city limits of Cape Girardeau and in Cape Girardeau County. And he was living there with his new girlfriend, Jamie Lynn Orman, one of the victims in this case. They had filed for the divorce, and the divorce was in the works. In fact, there was a court appearance scheduled on their divorce on the very day of this murder, October 27, 2009. There was to be an appearance in their divorce case later that very same day. But the murders took place about 5 o'clock a.m. that morning. You will hear that Michelle Lawrence hated Jamie Lynn Orman. She blamed her for breaking up her marriage. She blamed her for stealing her husband. And you will hear that while she was living with Ryan Patterson, as it got close to the time of these murders, as it got close to Tuesday, October 27, 2009, in the weeks leading up to that date, Michelle Lawrence had several conversations with this defendant, Ryan Patterson, about John Lawrence. She had told him that even though they were separated, she was still listed as the beneficiary. On the Sunday before the murders, October 25th, 2009, this defendant told Michelle Lawrence to go buy him bullets for his gun. He had a .44 revolver, a big silver-colored revolver with a long barrel, and it had a scope on top of it, the kind of scope that it puts a red dot on whatever you're pointing at that you're going to hit when you pull the trigger. He had this big .44 caliber revolver, and he told Michelle Lawrence to go buy him bullets. And she will tell you that yes, she did go buy him bullets. She bought him the bullets on Sunday, October 25th, that he was going to use to commit murder, and that he did use to commit murder that following Tuesday, 2 days later. And you'll not only hear her testimony that she bought the bullets, but you'll see the security video from Walmart that shows Michelle Lawrence buying the bullets that were used to commit these murders. So the bullets were bought on Sunday, October 25th, 2009. And Michelle Lawrence will tell you that after she bought them, she gave them to this defendant. And you'll hear that the next day, on Monday, October 26th, the day before the murders, in fact, less than 24 hours before the murders, he went out to practice his shooting. He went out to the country, to the home of William Hayden. William Hayden was the father of Michelle Lawrence. And he took 2 guns when he went out there. Mr. Hayden will tell you that the defendant showed up, and he had 2 guns with him. He had a .22 Ruger revolver, and he had this .44 caliber revolver. And he wanted to practice his shooting, and he also had brought a sack of potatoes. William Hayden will tell you that this defendant told him, somebody had told him that you could make a homemade silencer out of a potato, that you could bore a hole through it and put it on the end of a barrel and it would act just like a silencer. So he wanted to see if that worked. Mr. Hayden will tell you that this defendant took potatoes and bored a hole from end to end of a couple potatoes, and then he put them on the gun to practice. He didn't use the .44 because Mr. Hayden told him that gun would be so loud, see if it would work as a silencer. Mr. Hayden saw him do this, and he'll tell you that it did not really seem to work as a silencer. And he will tell you that that day, and you will see that it's within 24 hours of murders, this defendant said to William Hayden, "Do you think if I went in a house and I fired a gun inside the house, that people outside the house could hear?" Mr. Hayden said, "I don't know. He didn't really want to talk about it, and he didn't talk about it any further than that comment from the defendant. "Do you think if I was in a house and I fired a gun?" And throughout the day, he was off from work. And throughout the day, he was working on his plan. And you'll hear that 1 o'clock in the morning, by this point, midnight had already passed, an hour in the early. In continuance of his plan to commit murder, he tried to find someone to act as the lookout for him while he would go in the house. And he first approached a woman named Tammy Davis. Tammy Davis is also somebody who worked with him at the Jackson Manor nursing home. And she was a friend of his outside work. And Tammy Davis will tell you that he approached her that night and he offered her $15,000. He said, "How would you like to make an easy $15,000? She said, "How?" He said, "All you have to do is to be the lookout for me. I'm going to go inside a house and I'm going to hit a lick. And all you have to do is be the lookout." And she said, $15,000? Well, explain yourself. Explain what you mean. And he said, "I've been talking to a woman who wants her husband dead, and there's insurance money involved, and if you'll be the lookout, I'll pay you $15,000 out of that insurance money." And he even took her to the place where the house was. And he pointed out the house. And he said, "That's the house where I'm going to go inside, and I'm going to hit a lick. And I want you to be the lookout." And she said, "No way. No, I'm not going to do it. I don't want any part of it." And she will tell you the next day, she was watching the news on television, and they said there had been a multiple murder in Cape Girardeau, and they put up the picture of the house where the multiple murder had taken place, and she saw it was the same house that just hours before he had told her, "I'm going inside that house, and I'm going to hit a lick there tonight." She had guests, and the 3 guests she had were her 3 sons from her previous marriage. 2 of the sons, Jacob Orman, age 14, and Travis Orman, age 9, were upstairs. They were sleeping upstairs. This defendant never even saw them. He didn't even know they were there. But the 15-year-old boy, Derek Joseph Orman, was there. He was in that basement. He was in that area of the basement that was just inside the door where this defendant kicked in the door. There was a couch that folded out into a bed, and Derek Orman was in that bed, and you will see that it was within like 5 feet of the door that this defendant kicked in. This defendant kicked in that door with his gun in his hand, intending to kill John Lawrence and Jamie Orman, intending to kill the people in that home. He kicked in that door, and there was somebody lying in the bed, and he put his gun right up next to the cheek of the face of the person lying in the bed, and he pulled the trigger, and he shot that boy in the face. Then he took his gun and he headed toward the master bedroom, the doorway of which was just a few feet away. Upstairs, the 2 boys, Jacob and Orman, heard that booming noise. It woke them up. They heard that first booming noise. And Jacob, age 14, will tell you that after that first boom, he heard his mother scream, "No." He heard his mother scream, "No." And then he heard at least one more shot after his mother screamed. And you hear that the 2 boys upstairs, age 14 and 9, got up. And they heard those noises. And Jacob had heard the mother scream, and so they started making their way to the basement to go down the steps to see what had happened. Well, meanwhile in the basement, after Ryan Patterson had shot the boy, he then headed for the bedroom. He went to that bedroom. And I think the evidence will show that he flipped on the light. The evidence will show that Jamie Lynn Orman screamed, "No." The evidence will show that she was lying in bed, and that she curled into the fetal position and pulled the covers over her, and had her arms over her head like this. And he went up to the side of the bed, and he shot her in the head as she lay there in the fetal position with the covers over her head. in her own bed. The medical examiner will tell you that in his opinion, she was probably knocked unconscious instantly by that shot to the head. You will see that this defendant, after shooting her, then left her bedroom, went back out into the area of the basement. At this point, the light was on in her bedroom, throwing light into that basement area. He then went to the fold-out bed where Derek Joseph Orman was lying, shot in the face. Derek Joseph Orman was not dead yet. He had kicked off the covers. He was thrashing around in agony. This defendant went up to him and stood over him with the gun, trying to decide whether to shoot him again, because at this point it was clear it wasn't John Lawrence. And he stood over him with the gun, trying to decide whether to shoot him again. And that's what was happening when Ray came around to the back of the house and got to the back door. And Ray will tell you when he got to that kicked-in door, he looked inside and he saw this defendant, Ryan Patterson, standing over the boy. And Ray will tell you that from where he was standing, just feet away, he could see that it was a boy. He could see that it was a boy lying there in the bed. And this defendant was standing over him, pointing the gun down. And excuse my language, but it's an exact quote that Ray will tell you he said. Ray said, "What the fuck?" He said this defendant then spun around and pointed the gun at Ray. And Ray said, "Don't shoot, man, don't shoot. It's me, it's me." And this defendant said, "I fucked up, man. I fucked up. Let's get out of here." And the two of them ran. They ran out of the house. They ran around the house. They ran to that black Chevy Blazer. They got in with this defendant driving, and they drove away. And you will see that this defendant was in such a hurry to get away that he left that gas can. He left his gas can with that $3 worth of gas that he intended to burn the house down around the bodies of his victims. He left that gas can sitting there outside John Lawrence's house, in the back of the pickup truck bed of John Lawrence's green pickup that was parked in the driveway. This defendant left his gas can there at the house. He was in such a hurry to get away. And you'll hear that as he drove away, at one point, at least one point, he pointed the gun at Ray, who was in the passenger side of the truck. And he said to him, "If you tell anybody, I'll kill you. I will kill you if you tell anybody. Loose lips sink ships." And Ray said, "Don't worry, man, don't worry. I won't tell anybody. I promise I won't tell anybody." Ray will tell you that this defendant drove him and dropped him off, and that when this defendant drove off, he drove off in that Chevy Blazer, and he had that gun with him when he drove off. And he told him not to tell anybody, and Ray intended not to tell anybody. Meanwhile, back at the house at 1224 North Missouri, Derek Joseph Orman had not died instantly, just like his mother did. He'd not gone unconscious instantly, as his mother had. He was awake. And after his killer left, Derek Joseph Orman got up out of that bed. The bullet had gone in his cheek, had broken his upper jaw and his lower jaw, had blown out a bunch of his teeth. They were lying there on his pillow. It had gone out his neck. It had gone downward and through his mouth. He was choking on the blood that was filling his throat and his mouth. And you will see from the blood trail that he left that fold-out bed and he went into the bedroom, and this dying boy had looked at his mother as she lay dead in the bed. And then you'll see from the blood trail that he came out. And you hear from Jacob and Travis, the 14-year-old and the 9-year-old, that's when they got downstairs. By the time they got downstairs, Derek was standing at the foot of the stairs. He had stuff, they said, coming out of his mouth. He had blood pouring down his chest. They went up the steps, and you'll see the blood trail that goes up the steps and through the kitchen. And they went to the living room where Derek collapsed on the carpeted floor. And the 14-year-old Jacob called 911, and he talked to the 911 operator. The 911 operator gave him instructions about trying to clear his mouth out, trying to clear the obstructions, trying to clear the things out of his mouth so he can breathe. And Jacob will tell you that he got down on his knees and he held his brother in his arms and he tried to clear out his mouth. He tried to save his life. But you'll hear that he was unsuccessful and that 15-year-old Derek Joseph Orman died in the arms.
We anticipated would be somewhat different from what Mr. Swingle outlined. Now, what you will hear is essentially two different theories of why Jamie and Derek were murdered. One, that there was some conspiracy between Mr. Patterson and Michelle Lawrence to shoot John Lawrence and collect insurance proceeds. The other being that there was a burglary that went bad, and someone was killed during the course of that burglary. Now, I'll take them one at a time. In terms of the conspiracy to kill John, we anticipate that Michelle Lawrence, again, there was a divorce going at that time. Michelle and John Lawrence, they live separately. Michelle lives with Ryan Patterson. John Lawrence lives with Jamie Orme. Michelle Lawrence will tell you that there was no plan or agreement with herself and Mr. Patterson to kill John Lawrence to get insurance. Now, you won't have to rely simply on Michelle's testimony. Why? Because John Lawrence will tell you that during the course of this divorce proceeding, they had a custody arrangement. John had a lawyer who looked out for his interests. Michelle had a lawyer who looked out for Michelle's interests. There were children involved. They had a son, they had a daughter. The son and daughter's interests were being looked out for someone called a guardian ad litem. The custody arrangement reached between Michelle and John was that when John worked the night shift, this is from 6:30 p.m. to 7 a.m., Michelle had custody of the children. Now, why is that important? Because the murders were around 5 a.m. Now, this agreement they had been going on during this divorce proceeding. She'll tell you that she had been living with Ryan from February to October. So this is well known. When the kids are there, then John's at work. October 27th, when Jamie is killed, the kids are with Ryan and Michelle. They already know John is not home. So how could there be a conspiracy to kill someone who's at work? Now, you'll hear evidence from Mr. Hayes. This is Michelle's father. Now, the police talked to him on October the 27th and asked him, had he seen Ryan with a firearm? He told them no. Come to his house and shoot this firearm. Now, the thing about that, again, you won't have to rely strictly on his testimony. There's something called corroboration. He will talk about Ryan having a screwdriver. He'll talk about Ryan having some duct tape. He'll talk about Ryan taking some potatoes and drilling a hole in it.